A very warm welcome to richplanet.net, the program which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's program is about UFOs. Before we get underway, I want to explain why the UFO subject is so important to me personally. Having studied the information that's available, it is clear that the extraterrestrial phenomenon is being played down and hidden from the population at large. But it's not just information about UFOs and ETs that I would like the government to come clean about. It's all the other information which I believe is being hidden from the public, which is cloaked by the same layer of secrecy. So what are these secrets? I'm going to list 30 secrets and split them into 3 categories: definite, probable, and possible. These are my own personal beliefs at this point in time, and I don't expect everyone to agree with them. I believe that many of these secrets have been gleaned from our extraterrestrial visitors. Definite secrets include technology to go to the stars, including anti-gravity propulsion, free energy technology, which is 100% clean, wireless transmission of power, magnetic beam technology, underground bases throughout the world, some of which are shared with ETs, structures and bases on the far side of the moon, detailed knowledge of over 50 types of extraterrestrial, knowledge about ET societies, including that some run without money, motives and ideologies of ET races, and knowledge of the planets from which ETs originate. Probable secrets include knowledge of man's true genetic and historic origins, and whether our genetics have been manipulated in the past, the purpose of the alien abduction program, knowledge about the structures on Mars, knowledge of when ET races have visited Earth throughout our history, whether ET races believe in a universal God, knowledge of previously advanced civilizations which have lived on Earth, information on Earth's disasters, including floods and wars, time travel or the ability to view the future, remote viewing, and the unified theory of physics, including knowledge of the so-called Higgs boson. And finally, possible secrets include knowledge of whether human beings have a spirit, what a spirit is in scientific terms, knowledge of whether human beings reincarnate when our physical body dies, a cure for AIDS, a cure for cancer, knowledge of who built the pyramids and what the real purpose was, knowledge of the inner workings of the atom and whether the atom itself can cease to be tangible in our known universe by changing its vibrational state, how the universe manifested itself, whether there are other universes, and finally, whether there is a reason for 95% of our DNA being seemingly redundant. In this and in the forthcoming programs, I requested the opinions of 3 experts, who between them have been investigating the UFO subject for many decades. Tim Good is one of the world's leading UFO investigators. In his worldwide research, he has interviewed key witnesses and discussed the subject with astronauts, military and intelligence specialists, pilots, politicians, and scientists. Gary Heseltine is a detective constable and has investigated hundreds of police UFO cases in the UK, involving 700 British police officers. His PRUFOS database, the police reporting of UFO sightings, has been compiled over the last 7 years of investigation. David Boyle is an expert on conspiracy theories and the UFO phenomenon. He runs a fascinating visitor attraction at Blackpool called the Exhibition of the Workings of the Universe. I started by asking Gary Heseltine to describe the PRUFOS database.
So in total, we're now looking over 300 reports going back to 1901, involving over 700 British police officers. With every year, broadly speaking, I put 100 officers involved, because like some cases may involve 5, others 2, some 10, some 14. I mean, there is a particular case up that's released under the MOD files about Hexham and that sort of Ashington, and there's a case there that involves 14 officers seen from 4 different vantage points. There are 4 patrol cars of 2 officers and 6 officers on the ground, walking the beats.
I asked Gary if there were any cases where officers had come within very close range of a UFO.
Yeah, no. Again, with all the cases on the database now, I didn't do it for the first 4 reports, but I then started to adopt the HINEC classification system. Close encounter of the first kind, second kind, third kind, nocturnal lights, daylight discs, etc. So they're all broken down like that. The most common one obviously seen is nocturnal light. This is the most common police type of sighting, is a bright white light, like what I saw at 2 or 3 in the morning. There are probably now some 30 or 40 cases where they've been seen within what I call 400 metres.
Before we hear more from our UFO experts, I will explain a little bit about the theory behind some of the flying saucers which are seen in our skies. Many, but not all UFOs have a classic flying saucer shape, and there are many close-up photographs taken all over the world to back this up. In the last programme on UFOs, I explained the operation of the Bob Lazar craft, which uses element 115 at the heart of an antimatter nuclear reactor to generate a gravity wave, which is focused by 3 gravity amplifiers. This is not the only method proposed for anti-gravity propulsion. The following method is backed up by laboratory tests that have been carried out on Earth. Many flying saucer-shaped craft are reported to have a rotating outer ring. Some have 2 counter-rotating rings. It has long been suspected that the force of gravity is in some way linked to electromagnetism. The force that pulls us to the Earth is linked to the force within a magnet. Scientists call this the unified theory of physics, which describes all of the forces in the universe in one simple equation. This is the holy grail of physics, and scientists are still trying to discover it. In 1996, Russian scientist Eugene Podkletnov was experimenting with superconductors. A superconductor is a substance which at very low temperatures has 0 electrical resistance. This means if it is used in an electric generator, massive electric currents can be achieved. Conventional physics tells us that if you spin a conducting disk in a magnetic field, an electric current is generated. The faster the rotation, the higher the current. Podkletnov found that when a superconducting disk is spun at very high speed in a magnetic field, another effect is produced. If an object is placed in the center of the disk, its weight reduces due to an anti-gravity effect or gravitomagnetic field. It's believed that this type of machine could be improved by, instead of rotating a solid superconductor, a frictionless conducting liquid or superfluid could be used. The anti-gravity effect of such a machine would only be limited by how fast the liquid could rotate. If we were to use this technology to design a vehicle to travel into space, it would look like a flying saucer. In fact, it would have all of the characteristics which are observed with flying saucers, which are phenomenal gravity-defying acceleration, a large electric field, a glowing aura caused by the electric field, and totally silent operation. Ben Rich was head of Lockheed's Skunk Works, an organization which developed many experimental aircraft. Tim Good explained some of the secrets which he revealed during his retirement.
In 1993, 2 years before he died, Ben Rich made some very interesting statements at the University of California Department of Engineering. And 2 friends of mine, colleagues in UFO research, were present. And one of the things Ben Rich said was that he was asked about the UFO situation, and he said a lot of these projects are buried in very, very compartmentalized black budget things. Huge sums of money are involved, and it would take an act of God to get this out, to get the technology out, to benefit humanity. And he confirmed, he said, we now have the technology to go to the stars. That was in 1993. Okay. And he's made other comments confirming the existence of both extraterrestrial UFOs and what he sometimes referred to as UFO unfunded opportunities, which meant Earth-developed spacecraft, which the Americans have and have had for quite some time, just to confuse the whole UFO issue.
Gary Heseltine explains some UFO characteristics which are often observed in UFO sightings.
I've got a pretty good knowledge about the broad picture of UFOs and the history of it, and there are some definite flight-type characteristics that are seen now that I would say represent genuine UFO, i.e. instant acceleration, instant stop, vertical acceleration up into the air and down to the ground, reverses in direction, right-angled turns, all in silence, multiple objects sometimes separating and then going back into each other. They are classic, what I would call genuine UFO characteristics, things that we cannot do in the conventional sense.
I asked Tim Good if he thought the flying saucer shape, often observed, could be explained by the physics of rotating superconductors.
Well, the problem there is that there are plenty of craft which aren't of the classic flying saucer shape, but certainly I think that that could well apply. I've got in my book Alien Base cases going back to the 1920s, encounters with beings, with flying craft, and they talk about rotating materials inside the craft which nullify the effects of gravity.
I do look now at the common types of shape. I look at high multiples. I look at...
When you say that, do you mean more than one UFO in the
sky? Well, two types. There's two types of multiples. One multiple officer and two high multiples of UFOs seen at the time. Over the entire 7 reports, broadly speaking, what is fascinating for me and has always been the lead statistic is that approximately 70 to 75% of cases on the database are multiple officer witness. So it's not the lone officer who's mistaken at 3 in the morning, he's tired and whatever. That was the perception perhaps before that the skeptics might use. My statistics and data seems to prove totally the opposite, that 3/4 are in fact multiple officer cases.
Okay. Another characteristic of UFOs is their ability to make themselves invisible. This was demonstrated at Edwards Air Force Base to President Eisenhower in 1954.
Edwards Air Force Base, which was then top secret for top secret aircraft, there was a meeting arranged in February 1954. I don't know any more. I do know some things that happened as a consequence of that, but there was a meeting with Eisenhower and some top officials, including the American head of the Catholic Church, Cardinal McIntyre, I think, and a few other high-ranking people, named who they have been named in one famous letter, which I published in Alien Liaison. I think it definitely did happen. My information was that there was a follow-up arrangement to transfer technology. This was given to me by another source, and a meeting, I don't know if Eisenhower was involved at this particular meeting, but I know that some scientists went out to a certain desert location and were taken out by some CIA guys.
And it's alleged that they demonstrated that their ship could become invisible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently to Eisenhower's tremendous embarrassment.
Okay. Okay.
And he said that, they said they wanted to educate Earth people. They were very concerned about the nuclear build-up and everything. And Eisenhower was quite shocked by this. And he said, I don't think we're ready for that yet. And in the end, apparently they agreed. And they said, well, we're not going to stop being around, you know. And
many of the larger UFO craft are described as huge black triangles. It's rumoured that the US military have developed their own top-secret flying triangle called the TR-3B. The craft is nuclear-powered, totally silent, and uses an anti-gravity conducting ring. The ring surrounds a rotatable crew compartment and is filled with plasma. The device is known as a magnetic field disruptor. The plasma is mercury-based and pressurized to 250,000 atmosphere at a temperature of -123 degrees centigrade. then accelerated through the ring at up to 50,000 RPM to create a superconductive plasma which results in anti-gravity disruption. The magnetic field disruptor generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts or neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. This means that if you stood in the middle, you would suddenly weigh 1/10 of your actual weight. We heard from Tim Good that not all craft are flying saucer shaped. Often, huge craft have been sighted in various shapes, some described as bigger than a football pitch. 2 famous cases of such craft were witnessed at Phoenix in 1997 and Stevensville, Texas in 2008. There have been many recorded cases where multiple, smaller UFOs, including the flying saucer type, have been seen flying around and about the larger craft. The large craft are presumably motherships and are sometimes called cities in the sky. During the Travis Walton abduction case, Walton was taken on board one of these massive craft and witnessed different types of flying saucer parked up within the interior, almost like a flying aircraft carrier. Detective Constable Gary Heseltine.
There's one of my favourite cases on the entire database, and is a case that came to me directly from an officer. Was from a former Thames Valley police officer called Eric Raymond. He was a PC, and he'd served in another force prior, but it was in an area, I think in the sort of Long Crendon area, and basically he was in a rural area with 2 other officers. There were 2 police vehicles parked up, having a chat, cigarette, as they did, and this is 1978. Suddenly in the distance, a long way off, they see a light low to the ground, but it was so quick that they really couldn't make out what it was, and they didn't think too much about it. Suddenly, and there is no other lighting around, they see an object that doesn't arrive in the conventional sense of coming in left or right or from the air. It suddenly appears, which is again a characteristic that I do believe genuine UFOs have the ability to make themselves invisible, for want of a better word, turn it on and off. They're often seen to blink on and blink off. I think that's a characteristic. And this case bears this out, because there they are chatting away, rural location, suddenly blink, and there is an object a quarter of a mile away, so a few hundred metres away, no other ambient lighting, and this object they describe as the size of a football field, shining a beam down to the ground from an altitude of about 500 feet, the width of a football field, and it is slowly scanning the terrain, the countryside terrain. There are smaller objects flying around the large object. It's in total silence. They're absolutely gobsmacked. They try onto the radio, fails. They watch this object for 5 minutes, and then it, yeah, and then it just blinks out and gone.
It's not easy using conventional physics to explain how they managed to make these huge craft invisible, but it is clear that their technology is able to control and manipulate the fabric of nature in a far more advanced way than ours. They are able to render nuclear missiles and aircraft missile launching systems useless from miles away. They have also been known to use some kind of beam-type technology to levitate large objects up into their craft. As well as being able to appear and disappear seemingly at will, there have been many cases where UFOs have caused our own craft to disappear.
Absolutely. They have the capability of just absorbing aircraft, spacecraft, whatever, on board their giant carriers.
Okay.
Another case that came last year following an appearance on Look North, regional BBC Look North in my area, Yorkshire. 2 officers approached me. One case related to an area of Bristol called the Lulsgate area, and there was a small airport that was closed, and in 1966 2 officers were in a patrol car, and they're driving along sort of with the runway on their right, and there is a pub and a few little houses, street lamps, very quiet, airport closed. Suddenly, as they're driving past, their car headlights dim, cut out and the engine cuts out. Suddenly, again, similar characteristic, blinks on, they see what they describe as an oval-shaped object, white, 100 yards wide, hovering above the police car for approximately from a distance of about 200 metres away, altitude 500 feet. They watch it in total silence for 10 seconds and then suddenly gone. Yeah. Now, there is absolutely, it's an almost identical case to the Eric Raymond one. You know, in isolation, the skeptics will say these people are just imagining it. But when you get that sort of confirmation, years apart, totally unrelated people who have no connection to each other, then there has to be something going on.
The Roswell UFO crash of 1947 is well documented. In 1948, the American military recovered another flying saucer. This time it was completely intact.
Yes, this took place in Aztec, New Mexico in March of 1948, when a 100-foot diameter disc actually came down in a sort of controlled crash landing. The only damage was to one of the portholes, which looked as if it was either an entry hole from a shell from the military, which is quite possible. I'm convinced that craft was almost certainly shot down, and it was in perfect condition. There were at least a dozen small bodies inside, but they had been, or appeared to have been burnt. There was no fire involved, but because apparently the atmosphere just simply wasn't right for them, and this has been confirmed by a number of sources. It's thanks to Scott Ramsey, fantastic research on this Aztec case, that he managed to interview a few old-timers, and he got a few deathbed confessions from people who had been involved in the case. There's a lot of people, and some names have been published, and he's hopefully going to produce a book just on the Aztec case, and we should look forward to that.
Okay. It's believed that technology was derived from the Roswell UFO recovered a year earlier. I asked Tim Good if the same people would have extracted the technology from the Aztec craft. Philip Corso is known to have managed the extraction of technology from the Roswell UFO. So do you think he would have had his hands on the Aztec UFO as well? Or?
Together with General Trudeau.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think
it all depends?
If I was in his shoes, I would say, well, I don't want the crashed one. I want the whole one.
Well, maybe everything's on a need-to-know basis. You know, maybe Trudeau and Corso did not have a need to know about the Aztec one, which has always been far more sensitive than the Roswell one. The Roswell one, they learned some stuff. Sure, they got a lot of materials and some bodies, but the Aztec was an absolute gift from heaven, literally. I mean, incredible. And the technology, that's 1948, and according to my understanding, the Americans have had that technology for quite some time, to the extent that they have developed some discs and other type craft.
In next week's programme, I will be looking at how the Americans have managed to keep this technology well away from the public eye.